In this video, I'm going to show you briefly how to get started with COGNEX Insight Explorer, and we're going to step through just one function so you can get an idea of what it looks like, and talk briefly about some of the concerns while you're setting things up. So to get started, you're going to want to open the Insight Explorer. The easiest way to do this is just search for it on your PC and run the program. If you have the power set up on the camera already, you should see some LEDs on its side flashing, which means that it's ready to be connected to. You can see here in the list on the left that I have at least one camera available to me. This is an emulation of a camera so that I can run my programs without the camera connected and still process some images. For now I'm going to use this one. I can get into it just by double clicking, and you can see here that I have an image already. This is the last triggered image that it has. If you ever want to get a new one, all you have to do is push this button up here or push F5. You can see that if I roll the dice just briefly, the image changes. You can get a lot of information about it by right-clicking and going into the Properties menu, including its IP, which may be helpful later on. For now, you should be fine just by leaving everything on default. The screen that we're in right now is called the Easy Builder, which is the simplified and much less flexible version of the program, where you can develop some scripts for doing image processing, but you can't do anything nearly as complex as in the actual spreadsheet display, which is what we're going to work with primarily. What we can do here is take a look at some of the problems you might run into with a lighting condition. Right now I'm in my room and I have the window open and I have the room light turned on, and so you can see that my image looks decently exposed. If I want to mess with some of the camera settings to affect that, I can go into the Setup Image tab in these Application Steps menu, and you see that I have a bunch of options down here in this Acquisition Settings part. When you're messing with this, the easiest way to change things is to first click on Live Video, and now you can see that I have a pretty low FPS but up-to-date display of what's actually in front of the camera. The primary thing you'll be adjusting is the exposure. This is how long the camera takes to capture an image and then send it to my computer. Right now it's at 8 milliseconds, which is, not too high, not too low. And as I tick it up, you can see that everything becomes brighter. Something that can help you a lot when getting a good quality image on which to perform any sort of decision-making function that you want is this button up here, which gives you some information about whether something is overexposed in red or underexposed in blue. By themselves, these are not necessarily bad things. You can see actually that here the contrast is quite helpful if I'm trying to check out the dots on these dice. So you may want there to be a lot of exposure, in which case you would just crank this number really high. However, you can see now that the background that I have these dice on is not clearly black. So there's a bit of a balancing game here, and you'll notice especially that when I turn on this lamp next to the camera, now things are practically invisible because there is far too much light. This is also a good time to check out some of the physical settings on the camera. The camera is mounted with a lens which has 3 rings on it, each of which can be turned to adjust a particular setting. One is the aperture, one is the focal length, and one is the zoom. This is again a balancing act, and you just kind of have to figure out where you can get the most image clarity and sharpness with your lens for the given situation. Once you've got an image that you're happy with, what you can do is now head into the spreadsheet mode. You can access it by right-clicking on the camera in this menu and heading to Show Spreadsheet View, or by using the hotkey Control-Shift-V, which will now bring you into this new view. This is a little bit more intimidating looking, but is actually far more powerful. Up here you can find the settings that we were just messing with on the camera. For example, you can see the exposure, and you can update it with this menu. But the main thing to notice is that the image is actually stored in a particular cell. So you can see that this Acquire Image function references all of these cells to get camera settings, and then outputs an image in A0. This is going to be treated like any other spreadsheet cell. So if in Excel, for example, you were trying to sum the value of a column, you would do equals, then the function sum, and select the column. In Insight, if you wanted to perform a function on the image, you would insert the function and tell it to reference this image cell. Before I move on, I want to show you a couple of usability functions that might make your life a little bit easier. Up here you have an increase and decrease transparency button. That means that you can make the spreadsheet more invisible or more visible to the point of not being able to see the image behind it. This can be helpful when you're dealing with lots of functions, but you also want to be able to quickly see the effect that those functions are having on the image and where your output is actually coming from. So that may be useful to you. You can also remove the spreadsheet overlay entirely if you want to look clearly at the image. And you can always trigger a new image and go to live video from here as well. So to get started with some actual image processing, you're going to need some of the pre-built functions that COGNEX has made for you. Over here on the right, you'll find this palette with a Functions tab, and inside of it are all of the functions that have been provided for the program. You can do quite a lot by making up your own methodologies, using different mathematical operations, because that's all that these really are, but these are much simpler to get started with. And as an example, I'll show you the extract histogram function. So a histogram is a statistical tool that tells us, roughly the distribution of some values in an image. And the reason that's important in image processing is that all of these pixels are actually just cells with a particular value assigned to them. The black cells are closer to 0, while the white cells are closer to 255, which is the maximum value. So if I come into this spreadsheet and I select the cell I want to insert into, you'll see that this dialog box pops up after I double-click on Extract Histogram in the palette. You can see that it's making an absolute reference to the image cell that we talked about before, and that there's a fixture box, which is not important for now, and a region box. It can be expanded, and it shows that it has an XY dimension and a bunch of other properties. The easiest way to set this up is to double-click on the region box, and it'll bring you into this view here where you can adjust the boundaries of that box. In this case, I just want to get some information about my whole image, so I'll drag my bounding box here as close to the image border as possible. It will not let you drag it over, so you have to make sure that you're within the boundaries. When you're done, you can just hit enter. And for this demonstration, I'm going to turn on all of the graphics that I can so that you can see kind of what's going on. And now you'll see that there's some statistical information here in this graphic. What happened when I inserted this function is that it filled in some cells for me automatically. And the reason that that is important to notice is that it's going to overwrite everything that's in its way with this default insertion. So whenever you're building up your program, I would recommend leaving at least 2 rows of space between different entries, both top and bottom, and also not having anything out to the right, because some of these can take up quite a few rows and quite a few columns. This function, in particular, just tells us, once again, how much of something there is in an image. In this image, which is mostly black pixels, you'll see that there's quite a few over here on the bottom left that are in the values that are very close to 0. There's not much going on at the higher end. This value here is the function-determined threshold value. So the function sorts the pixels into dark pixels or bright pixels, and it does that by checking out whether a particular pixel has a value higher or lower than this threshold value. Coming back into the spreadsheet, you can see that listed here, and then also the dark and bright pixel counts here. You can also figure out the average value of a pixel in the image, and you'll see that this updates live whenever I put this index card in there. Take a new image, you can see that now there's a little bit more activity in the higher range, which is all of these pixels. One last thing to mention before this pre-lab video is done is that whenever you're stuck on something, COGNEX actually has quite extensive documentation that you can read online. The quick way to access it is by mousing over it and hitting F1, and this box will pop up, and you can see that there's quite a lot of information on what the function does and also all of its properties.